Thank you. So today's work, actually, we shortened the title. It's an open persona framework.
Please move to your seats.
Okay. So it's open persona, a framework for digital identity. Okay. So with the rapid expansion of digital services, it has brought a lot of benefits for us in the society, but it also has led to a significant rise in the cyber threat, particularly in the identity theft. Identity theft is one of the most prevalent and harmful cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, where malicious actors steal personal information and use it for fraud and misimpersonation. News reports, such as one that you can see here, frequently highlight how victims suffer financial loss, damaged reputation, and emotional disruption due to such breaches. Current identity verification systems often rely on centralized databases, making them prime target for hackers. Once breached, the consequences are often severe because the stolen data can be easily replicated and sold. Therefore, our goal is to explore better methods for securing identity, and we believe that blockchain technology holds the potential to create a more secure and decentralized and tamper-resistant identity system that can address these challenges that we're talking about. By integrating the blockchain technology with digital identity management and using the crypto primitives, we aim to reduce the risk of breaches and give users more control over their digital identity. Blockchain technology is revolutionizing many sectors, especially in the area of requiring trust, security, and transparency. One of its key strengths is its immutability. What does that mean? That means once a data is added to a block, it should be quite difficult or hard to alternate without the consensus from the entire network.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session is beginning to start.
So I think I started quite early. Well, let's continue. This feature makes it ideal for the identity management, where data integrity is really important. Open Persona, our framework, is actually leveraging this strength to build a robust identity verification system. In our approach, a government-issued certificates.
Welcome to the stage, Jennifer Swanson.
I think we have to wait for a couple of seconds. Yes, I think we have to wait for a couple of minutes until they're done. I think we have to disconnect this one probably. Thank you. You saved the presentation. You're a hero. Okay. Okay, so our framework actually leverages the strength to build a robust identity verification system. In this approach, the government-issued certificates are stored on the blockchain, where they can be independently verified both online and in person. We utilize different crypto primitive techniques such as public key infrastructure, which I will explain in the next slide, to able to strengthen this framework. These crypto primitives allow us to ensure identity integrity and secure verification. We also will introduce a new consensus protocol, which we call it proof of primacy, which enables us to have a better secure model. So here is a basic overview of how our framework functions. It starts with an issuing authority, such as the Department of Motor Vehicle, which provides the user with a smart card containing a private key. This key is encrypted with a PIN, ensuring security on the card. Then the corresponding public key is signed by the authority and stored on the blockchain. When the user needs to prove their identity, they sign the necessary information which is needed with their smart card or the key on the smart card, and the system verifies their signature against the blockchain stored verification certificate. Okay, so this is the entire picture. Now let's deep a bit in and see what crypto primitives we're using to ensure the security. One of the important aspects is the public key infrastructure. It has a pair. It's a pair of key, a public key which is actually shared with everyone. Everyone can have access on it to it, and there's a private key which is secret for the user and is stored on the smart card. The open persona leverages the strength of crypto techniques such as RSA or encrypted elliptic curve encryption, which has been proven mathematically to be highly secure and efficient in preventing unauthorized access. When a user interacts with the system, their digital signature ensures that the integrity of the data remains intact and cannot be tampered with while verification is done against the blockchain. This makes the system resilient to hacking attempts or identity fraud. In traditional identity systems, personal information is often stored on the centralized database, making them prime target for hackers, which is really dangerous. Once a breach happens, sensitive data can be exposed to public, which is not safe for them anymore and can be used. In contrast, open persona offers a much more secure approach. Here, no personal information is ever stored on the blockchain. Only the user's public certificate is recorded. This means that even if someone is able to access the blockchain, they would not be able to extract any meaningful personal data from the information on the blockchain. Our framework also allows users to verify their identity without revealing any sensitive information. Identity verification is done through crypto proofs, ensuring that individual privacy is maintained at all the time. Also, only the issuance of the certificate is recorded on the blockchain, not the details and subsequent interactions that happens after that. This means that even if the data miners were to analyze the blockchain and the bugs on the blockchain, they would not be able to piece together any useful information about how the identity was used by the user or any organization. We actually, in addition to what we have, in order to strengthen more the security that is provided to user, we introduce an extra layer of protection through the use of subkeys. Subkeys are additional crypto key pairs that are used by the user, which uses the primary secret key to sign them. These subkeys can be used for different purposes, such as signing specific transaction over identity for different services. This allows users to separate the digital activities while keeping their main key secure and reduce the risk of compromise. So if I'm interacting with bank, I can have my specific key pair for bank, and when I'm using it for another reason, I can have a specific pair of key, and this way I'm distinguishing and separating the two. So by using these subkeys, user can limit the exposure of their primary key, ensuring that even if a subkey is compromised, their entire identity still remains safe. This is particularly useful in scenarios where users engage with multiple services or platforms, as they can assign a unique subkey to each of these platforms, thereby isolating the potential security risk. In addition, the use of subkey allows the more granular control over the digital interactions, which is crucial advantage in today's interconnected digital landscape. Okay, now to implement open persona, we propose a new type of privileged blockchain network. In this network, all the nodes can read the blockchain, but only privileged nodes, such as the government entities, can add data to the blockchain. This ensures that the integrity of the network is maintained while giving state authorities the ability to issue and revoke keys. For open persona to be successful, the blockchain must meet several important criteria, which I will list them here. It must support key issuance and revocation while introducing minimum change to existing identity management process. The system must be simple to implement and inexpensive to maintain, as this will make it more attractive to government agency. Finally, the blockchain must avoid centralizing control, ensuring that state authorities retain autonomy without excessive federal oversight. These design principles will help ensure that open persona can be adopted nationwide. To make our framework work, we need a privileged network where all state authorities can work together as equal participants. Like here we have a couple of states shown as an example. These authorities must be able to submit transactions to the blockchain easily and inexpensively. But current consensus protocol that we have limitations that prevent them from fully meeting these requirements. The most three important one is the proof of work, which is costly, it's slow, it's not scalable for such purpose. We have proof of stake, which is, while it's less resource intensive, is more suitable for financial systems and introduces unnecessary complexity. Proof of authority is another consensus protocol which suffers from centralization and increases the risk of attacks. So if we dive into it, we see that we need a consensus protocol mechanism that could address the challenges of these main three consensus protocols. As I said, in the proof of work, it is incredibly energy inefficient and relies on significant computation power. The proof of work, actually, which is not viable for identity-based application that needs to be efficient and scalable. On the other hand, proof of stake is more suited for financial transactions where collateral can be put up, but this does not translate well for identity verification systems where fairness and equality is essential. As a result, existing consider mechanisms fall short of our goals, which led us to design the proof of primacy to address these specific limitations and ensure that it meets the needs of the decentralized identity system. So, Dane, do you want to go ahead?
So, real quick before I get into proof of primacy, we can go as in-depth or not as in-depth depending on what your understanding is. We have plenty of time for questions afterwards, so just keep track of them in your head until the end of it. But the primary reason, and I really wanted to kind of drive this point home, that we had to come up with a new form of consensus. You might be familiar with some recent advancements in this type of usage. So primary example, California recently started tokenizing car titles for their DMV, and they were putting it on a blockchain. So why can't we do something similar to that? The answer is that they were using an existing blockchain known as Arbitrum to do that. It's very easy, but there is a lot of cost involved because you still are hindered by the transaction costs of dealing with that native blockchain, as well as being kind of beholden to an unaccountable third party for the operation of your, in this case, your state government for your identity issuance, and that we found to be unacceptable. And so we came up with a new consensus protocol called proof of primacy. We designed it intentionally to be simple, fair through random leader election, which is a very critical component. Proof of work does this through essentially racing each other to find the correct block hash. Proof of stake does it through almost like a lottery based on who put their collateral into the pool. Proof of primacy does it in a completely pseudo-random way. And I say pseudo-random because getting truly random in the realm of computer science is very difficult, but it's pseudo-random in that it's unpredictable. It also had to be fault-tolerant, had to be energy and time efficient, as Dr. Malecki mentioned, and it has to be scalable because once a system like this is out in the wild, once states say they started to adopt this, it's already in place at that point. You can't land that plane, so to speak, while it's in the air. You need to be able to build on top of it and leave it in place while those additions are being made. So it has to be fully scalable to theoretically an unlimited amount. Current consensus protocols are not. They might be scalable to a certain point, but they're not fully scalable in that eventually you're going to break. You're either going to have communications collisions to the point where it's completely not usable, or it's completely slowed down to, it's not usable. Or essentially the network starts forking. I'll figure this out one of these days. Okay. So the basics on how proof of primacy works. Round leader is identified by the modulo of the last block. Now, if you're not familiar with how modulo works, essentially every block in a blockchain has its block hash, which really is just a representation of a very large number. If you take that very large number and you apply a modulo to it, you can get it to the number of current nodes in that network. So say, for instance, you have 50 states participating, one vote for each state, or one potential leadership vote per state. You modulo that very long number by 50, you're going to get a number between 0 and 49 every single time. Now, those 0 to 49 are serialized to each state. You can immediately detect not only if you're the leader or not, but who is the leader that round, and you can do so without having to communicate with each other. And you can do it very fast. This is the kind of math that computers are extremely good at. A second component of it, I put a nice little heartbeat thing up there because we actually called it a heartbeat or a network pulse, is the leader periodically self-identifies to the network so that not only can they indicate readiness, but also compliance. Now, what I mean by compliance is that the node not only recognizes that they are the leader, but is communicating that they are the leader with the rest of the network. The rest of the network will already know ahead of time whether that person is the leader or not. Now, this accomplishes two goals. It accomplishes not only knowing that the leader is connected to the network and is ready to finalize the block at the specified time based on that implementation, and it also indicates that the leader is complying with the current network consensus protocol. They're not a quote-unquote malicious actor in the sense that they're not being disconnected, they're not refusing to cooperate. If that happens, then this allows the network to rebalance and remodulo the hash to determine the next leader. The block is finalized by the leader at the specified time interval. We intentionally leave that part vague. That is up to the implementation itself. There is no limitation on the protocol in that regard. It could be a block every 30 seconds. It could be like, Bitcoin, for instance, a block about every 10 minutes. Depends on how quickly those blocks needed to be validated and authorized for the intentional use case. In this case, I would envisioning probably 2 to 3 minutes per block. That would translate to you just got your ID and it's activated before you're even out to your car in the parking lot, which is definitely a lot faster than how Georgia does it now. So some things that proof of primacy contributes to this project. The main thing, the number one thing, the biggest thing, can't foot stomp this on this enough, is fairness among network participants. Now, that's not just from a legality perspective of saying that we want every state in this model to be equal, although that is important. The biggest component about fairness in this case is that not only everybody gets their equal shot at this, nobody is more powerful than the other, but also that it's unpredictable beyond that current block or epoch. You can't determine the next leader without the last block hash. If that last block hasn't been hashed yet, how can you determine 1 round out, 2 rounds out, 3 rounds out, which then reduces your attack surface greatly? If you can't predict which of the 50 or however many nodes are going to be the next leader, how do you know what to attack? You just have to attack everything, which can be fairly preventative in this case. The nearly instantaneous confirmation. So I mentioned that earlier with, you could set it to 30 seconds. 6 minutes, 5 minutes, all depending on what considerations for that particular use case it is, whether or not it's more important that things get confirmed quickly, or whether or not like space is a primary concern where you would want larger blocks versus smaller blocks with smaller amounts of transactions and more blocks. That's entirely up to implementation. No added energy requirement for block finalization. So that's essentially moduloing that last block hash. I mean, that's just a couple of quick addition problems for the computer. That doesn't require, it's not like mining is today. It's fault tolerant against forking and network outage. That's where the network pulse comes in. So say, for instance, the leader drops. If, say, 2 minutes has passed and the rest of the nodes haven't received a pulse from that leader, they can then assume that leader is disconnected from the network or something is out with them. Their serial is blocked for that epoch or for that block, and they just rehash it using the new modulo. They find that new modulo, they find the new leader, it just keeps rinsing and repeating until the block gets finalized. That additionally gets tracked on-chain through the use of a nonce value, a leader rounds nonce value, which allows for auditability after the fact. You could very easily look. Okay. You could very easily look at the blockchain, go block by block by block as you're verifying it automatically, and determine where there were network problems by how high does the leader rounds nonce get in a block. Most of the time, under normal circumstances, it should be 0, but there might be some instances where it gets up to 1 or 2 or 3, but if you see one where it's 10, 15, 20, then you know that there's something going on with the network at that time. And once again, constant scalability. So this is where it got really valuable, was the constant scalability of this thing. Because there's no added communications requirement, the only thing that's communicating during a round, with the exception of normal transaction volume, which is kind of a constant in this case, like you're not reducing that, without reducing the number of people getting IDs. You can, you don't have any additional communications in this case, because the only thing that's transmitting as a part of consensus is going to be that leader doing the periodic network pulse. That's just a constant. Normally, you'd have to have, if you imagine like an election, like an election of individuals as we do in person, where you'd say, I want to pick this person. Someone else would say, I have to pick this person, I want to pick this person, I want to pick this person. There has to be some two-way communication here, because they have to have other people saying, hey, who did you pick? Or who are you picking? You're not just going to fire off your vote into the void. And so that two-way communication is largely what's going to make a lot of other protocols unscalable. Because if you think you got 50 nodes, two-way communication is not that bad. If you got 50 million nodes, two-way communication starts to get really messy really quickly. And so if you've only got one person essentially broadcasting out, it doesn't matter if you've got 50 nodes or 50 million nodes. They're just receiving. They don't have to actually send anything unless they're the leader. And once again, for fault tolerance, going back to that again, if you're in the network and you know you're not the leader, you know that number 52 is supposed to be the leader, but you see number 52 and number 61 both pulsing at the same time, you know that they're not in sync. We've also included a way of rebalancing the network to determining which one of those is actually the correct one and which one the network should listen to. So we did some basic performance metrics and evaluation. In our initial testing, open persona demonstrated minimal latency. Identity verifications were processed almost instantly. This is a huge improvement over traditional consensus mechanisms that may slow down due to mining or complex validation processes. Current mining also is relatively unpredictable. I used Bitcoin as an example earlier. Everyone knows it's supposed to be about 1 block every 10 minutes. Does it actually happen like that? It could be 9 minutes. It could be 8.5 minutes. It could be 10.5 minutes. Like there's a lot of wiggle room there. It's just based on essentially a best guess of the math of who's participating in the network. This doesn't do that. This is going to be, okay, we're expecting the leader to finalize this every 3 minutes, period. If that doesn't happen at 3 minutes, it means there's something wrong. We're going to rehash the modulo, get a new leader who's going to immediately refinalize the block and move on. Additionally, the throughput rate was very high, suggesting that the system can handle a large number of identity verifications at the same time. You got to think in that case, if we're issuing IDs and this is a nationwide system, how many IDs are issued on a hourly by hourly basis nationwide? I posit that question because I don't know the answer to that. It's probably going to be quite a bit because there's no documentation that I've found for every single state how many IDs they issue per hour. But you can imagine it's probably pretty high. Their energy efficiency is another key advantage. I've mentioned that. I'm not going to pound on that anymore. And additionally, the network resilience being high, so all of the fault tolerance. We put a lot of thought into the fault tolerance to make sure that data integrity, first and foremost, remains intact. So putting all those together, going back to those stated requirements that we needed for open persona, where we needed fairness, we needed absolute data integrity, we needed, my brain is totally, efficiency, and we needed low cost. I'm going back to the California example again. Sure, it might only be a few cents per transaction. Now, anybody who's followed any of these blockchain networks knows that those fluctuate greatly based on a lot of variables that have absolutely nothing to do with what California is actually using the blockchain for. This allows users, governments, to build it themselves, operate it themselves very efficiently, and essentially run it on existing hardware. So, putting it all together, the benefits of open persona. It makes significant improvement over traditional identity management systems. It offers a nationwide identity standard which allows state authorities to retain full control over the issuance and management of identities without federal oversight. So what we're envisioning with this system is the federal identity standard without the federal identity control requirement. If you could imagine getting a U.S. ID like what a lot of other countries do, there's obviously some legal and possibly some constitutional concerns with doing such a thing here, which is why we haven't done it. But we also end up with the problems of IDs not being necessarily as portable. How long have we heard about the real ID requirement for the U.S. that some states still haven't adopted yet, and therefore it causes some serious problems when you're trying to get on an airplane, for instance. This could potentially eliminate such things. Moreover, open persona provides a secure and trustless way for individuals to verify their identities online to third parties. It's achieved through the cryptographic methods we highlighted, which eliminate the need for third-party verification. So going back to the subkeys that Dr. Malecki introduced earlier, such subkeys could very easily replace online identity verification. So say, for instance, instead of using a username and a password, things that are relatively very easy to breach compared to modern cryptographic methods, you instead generate a new key pair specifically for the purpose of logging onto USAA, for instance. All you would have to do is submit your signature using that key pair that was signed by your master key, and all USAA would have to do is say, okay, this was signed by their private key that was also signed by the same key that corresponds on the blockchain that this CA, which happens to be the Georgia DMV, has already signed as them. That's something that can be automatically verified nearly instantaneously. And if USAA were to ever be breached, I'm using USAA as an example here, I don't work for them, if they were to be breached, and your key was to be exposed, first off, all the attacker would get is your public key, which even if you wanted to, you could just regenerate very easily. They wouldn't get anything that ties you to any other systems. They wouldn't get another one that you maybe use to log on to Facebook, or another one you log on to, a government website, or another one that you used for a local government function. So the CA functionality backed by the government level identity issuance, we mentioned in there no more trusting of the third-party providers, and what I'm hinting at in that is what we were discussing prior to this, which was OAuth. So the way like Google OAuth works, for instance, is you verify you are who you say you are using your Google account, and then anything you log into with Google after that is you saying, hey, I'm not going to tell you who I am. Go ask Google who I am. And Google's saying, yep, this is who they say they are. Go ahead and authenticate them. Ours is the same concept as that, only it's the government doing that. It's under your government ID. And it doesn't require any additional government interaction to do that. Like, you don't have to ask the government and wait for a response. You just look it up on the blockchain, and you'll know right then and there. Do what? Oh, this one? Okay. Yeah, I must have. So open persona key management. This is a bit of a minutia for this, but you would add certificates. I say you, Royal You, the DMV, the government entity that's issuing your ID, would upload the transaction for your certificate onto the blockchain. There could be other transactions. We've encountered 3 different ones thus far. So like adding nodes, say for instance, a new DMV office opens, or add certificate, new identity is issued, which this is going to be the bulk of them. There could be a revoke certificate. For instance, the way we were doing it in our implementation is if there is a new certificate, the system only recognizes the most recent. But what this could be used for is, say for instance, you relocate from your state to another state. You get your new identity issued at your new state, you get your new driver's license. That then revokes your old one. So we listed out some envisioned use cases here. So username, password replacement, that's probably the easiest and the lowest hanging fruit of them. Secure and instantly auditable online voting. We kind of go from 0 to 60 really quick on that one. If you can immediately prove who you are, whether or not it's in person or online, using your identity, that opens up the possibility for online voting in a way that is provable. Now, obviously, you could argue, well, what if somebody gets a hold of your ID and also happens to have the PIN or the password, whatever was used to encrypt your key on that? That's a possibility as well, but it still, once again, is auditable. It's very quick to see, okay, this ID was used at this time. Now there's something that could potentially be refuted. Replacement of social security numbers with non-human readable and easily changed cryptographic keys. So if you think about a cryptographic key at its core, it's really just a big number. A lot of this is a lot of really big numbers. It's not a 9-digit number that everybody in here memorizes and uses on probably way more than they really should or that was ever really designed for. But for some reason, social security numbers, those 9-digit numbers, are still the gold standard of your identity, even though every single one of us probably has it existing in dozens, if not hundreds, of places that we probably don't want it to exist. A cryptographic key of that length isn't something you're going to necessarily memorize or use. You're not going to enter it. You're not going to give it to a company. But if you're using it to sign things that you're giving to that company, then you're keeping it safe. Once again, anywhere that identity must be proven but risk of PII release is high. So think of anything that is a high-value target for a hack and leak operation. Anything that you've heard ransomware targeting in the last 10 years. or so, ever since they moved to the hack and leak model. There's a lot of PII out there. There's a lot of PII, every time that you've had to go to the doctor and enter your social security number. Now, what if you could just take that form and digitally sign it? Now what's leaked? Cool, they've got your address. That's all public information anyway. But they can't actually take over your identity at that point. Now, in the rare instance where your card does get lost, this is just a matter of getting a new one. You get a new one, you revoke your old key, and it can't be used anymore. So, current stage of development, we are currently in a prototyping implementation phase. So, algorithmically, it's done. Programmatically, it's mostly there. It's still a work in progress. I just talked a lot.
I missed the first half of the discussion you brought it up. So in this use case, you're saying that the state of California owns your private key and you just have a public key you share with them? How do I understand the public key private key here?
California, the state issues, say technically they issue it, but they wouldn't possess it. No.
So me as a user would own my private key?
Correct.
Right. And so how would a user store that security?
On a smart card. So, see a lot of uniforms in here. I know you guys all love your CAT cards.
Like PKI CAT cards.
Yep. Where not only the storage function is on that CAT card, but also the signing function is as well. So that it essentially functions very similarly to a CAT card or like a chip and pin debit card, where you're not actually sharing your private key, you're just using that to directly sign.
And how do you deal with network loading? Any type of load on, like the Bitcoin network is used. You can add messages to your transactions. Same with the Ethereum network. You can add messages to slow down the network. As this expands, that's a problem.
So we're
Going
limiting
from California to all the rest of the country.
the way we've addressed that is we're limiting. So I had a slide on there about like different functions you can do for like add node, et cetera. There's going to be a limitation to that. Like we're not allowing transactions to have like op returns on them, or such a network could also run say like smart contracts, but we're not implicitly requiring or prohibiting that. That's going to be implementation specific.
Implementation by state or by right?
Yes. Like this is not relying on smart contracts by any means. So in this case, given that you're at a very core fundamental level, the blockchain in this case is being used as an immutable key distribution mechanism. So it's really no different than how like cryptocurrency is using right now in financial means, where you've got your address on the blockchain, which is really just a base 58 or encoded representation of your public key.
Instead of being actually encrypted, as well as being actually encrypted. But even with Bitcoin or whatever in cryptocurrency-based network, you can trace it.
Correct.
So, this would be possible here, and it will compromise someone with access to all the history.
So the history in this case is not stored. The only thing that's stored is, once again, it's only being used as a key distribution mechanism. So say you actually use your identity, you're not submitting that as a transaction. No transaction is going to be submitted or going to be on the top of the state government. So issuing your ID, revoking it, let's say it's you, any other updates that like the state needs to do, but you logging on to Google or you making a purchase, none of that, those are not transactions. It only needs to be read by a third party that needs to verify who you are.
So the two-part problem of the current one, we can add transactions, which has been said. We can add new certificates, new members for the but there are also
So this is a form of proof of authority if you think about it. However, proof of authority is not as well defined as a lot of people think. It's more of a very broad umbrella for any type of privilege network, really. Proof of authority doesn't define how the actual consensus is going to go. It just says privileged network, handful of nodes that are privileged, they have essentially right access to the blockchain, whereas everybody else doesn't need access. So we had to further define on that in order to get drilled down without having to just say, oh, hey, generically, we want this to be proof of authority done for this mechanic.
I want to ask you what insight is. We want to answer the fairness. So what we have here is we add some random aspect there. In the proof of authority, we try to go that round of completed and the leaders, which is predictable. But here we want the alternative to prevent a lot of accidents. So here it kind of differs from what
so the open persona protocol actually looks like the only thing it does is store your PTI cert. Who is choosing who the certificate is stored? Or is it only the state?
This is actually what started the project, is that exact question. So all of the states essentially collectively in a distributed manner are acting as a CA in that case. What started this whole project to begin with was what is kind of say you were attacking an organization. Where is the one place, like the one golden nugget of where you want to be? If there was some way that you could get into the CA, which is why oftentimes CAs are air gapped. Now, how do you prevent that? Once again, I mentioned air gapping it. The other way, distribute it.
Well, right now, the certificate CASR that comes from the federal government, NSA. So, why not just use a pre-existing CA?
Because that increases your attack surface. It doesn't solve the decentralization problem. If you keep things centralized, you keep the attack surface. Whereas in this case, and plus you can also make some players a little bit more, kind of make it a little overwhelming there, more fair than others. In that, say you've got a big CA that everybody relies on like California, right? We've got high population. Now compare that with another CA that's going to be a much smaller, Rhode Island. Which one's going to have more network power in that case based on throughput, bandwidth, and requirements?
So you have one collective CA or 50?
We do have one collective CA, it's the blockchain. It's distributed.
It actually issues a certificate?
No, it stores it. The issuers are the individual states.
So is it a collective certificate of authority, or does each state have? So 50.
Yes.
So what's to prevent a person from having multiple certificates?
So in our implementation, once again, this is implementation specific, but in our example, what we did was we said, okay, if the same individual has multiple certificates on there, only the most recent is valid. So when you're actually verifying for these, you're just working backwards from most recent to least recent.
So doesn't this affect the group of becoming the federal government now? Because all of the states.
If you would argue that all 50 states together equals the federal government, it's a different collective. I mean, the federal government could participate in this along with the states, but they wouldn't individually have any more power than any of the other states.
Yeah, what does that transfer process look like? For example, if I am from Virginia, Manhattan, the doctors sign my medical doctor, it's actually an individual. How does it look like to grant access to that?
So it doesn't lock up your access. It would only be at the time that you're trying to prove it. So say you go to the doctor's office and you have your ID. At that time, that ID is valid, therefore your identity the doctor gets the green check that says, you're good to go. This is you. It's not retroactively storing it, like, for instance, on the blockchain, like you mentioned before. You're not storing that data on the blockchain afterwards, so it's not like a retroactive saying, okay, well, this is no longer your ID, therefore you're locked out of it. No, it's only at the point of when you prove your identity. Is your ID valid or not? Correct.
Okay, so this goes back to the question I asked prior to these updates. Is there any time, either say before a certificate is issued or after a certificate is revoked, when a person has no authentication of identity at all? And does the revocation of an identity instantly create a new one? And if not, why?
It does not right now under our implementation. We would expect that such a thing, I mean, obviously you have to have an identity. Everybody's got an identity, whether or not the government says you do or not. You have an identity. Like, that part is immutable. However, how it's actually used going forward, can the, as you put it, can the government unperson it? Once again, I can make the argument that they can do that now. What happens if all of a sudden your social security number doesn't come to you as a person?
Should your system prevent that?
So we can't prevent that. Yeah. I would once again, I would make more of an argument that whether or not you could be quote unquote unperson is more of a political problem than a technical problem. That said, that's still, I mean, as nasty as it sounds, that's probably a power that the government would want to retain, and given that the government would be the immediate customer of such a solution, like, I think it would probably be counterintuitive.
What tools do the government use to monitor blockchain?
You could use any tool, I mean, whether or not it's basic ad hoc scripting. The idea of this blockchain is that it's absolutely public. There's nothing sensitive on there, but everybody needs to be able to see it to verify it, whether it's third parties, non-government entities that are trying to verify who you are, but also other state governments.
And on-chain is just a hash of your ID?
No, it's your public certificate. So, I mean, essentially it might as well just be a hash. It's going to be your public key signed by the CA, in this case, of the state issuing authority.
So someone like me who runs crypto tracing and identify you, like the government says, identify you as you, so can identify attributes of you and combine it with other data to have more holistic picture of your life and pattern.
So the key issuance, no. And the reason is because when you're verifying who you are, like say for instance, you have to say, I am me. You're signing, i.e. encrypting, a piece of information that was provided by a challenge of sorts, right? There's nothing that's being actually stored on the blockchain that identifies you as an individual.
I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about identifying you. It's impossible to identify you on any level. It's the attributes that we close to you that combine with other data that can really identify you.
So are you talking about other devices on the blockchain? If that's the case, we cannot store anything beyond the certificates and the keys on the blockchain. So if I'm trying to have
But it's not about that.
The only attribute
The point
that
is that you're using some sort of infrastructure to engage the government, right? Some sort of IT, some sort of cloud provider, right? Well, right now, doing what I do, I identify the infrastructure provider down to the subnet, take that information, combine with other data, to identify where you live exactly. That's my point.
that's based on transactions that you submitted from that IP address.
Right. Which is
You're not
which is your communication to the government in this network.
No, your communication to the government in this network is when you get your ID as a human being. It's in
person. You have to have your ID issued in person because your keys are also generated at the time of issuance.
You centralize the attack.
It centralizes it in the individual CAs.
Right. That's my point.
I mean, if you want to
Make it
attack,
a lot easier.
you want to attack all 50 states
Yeah, that's easy.
together.
That's easy. We do it all the time. That's good. Thank you.
If you can go in a little bit more of the goal of research, and you mentioned like that the leaders are kind of randomly assigned, and so would that make it impossible to intercept a leader?
So that was a very important objective of ours, was basically that it was impossible for a attacker to know who the leader was going to be before the network could know who the leader was going to be. And that was one thing that you mentioned earlier about proof of authority, like when you ask, what is this different than proof of authority, and a lot of the times they do it in a round-robin way. You know that, okay, one was the leader, next time it's going to be two, next time it's going to be three. You could potentially go 5, 6 blocks ahead, find an attacker that gives you enough time, or an attack surface that gives you enough time, and intercept in the network. In this case, you're not going to know who the leader is before the rest of the network can know, so you're not going to know more than one block ahead, because it requires the last block to be hashed and finalized before you can determine who the next leader is going to be.
And is there any downtime with that? Like, for it to be able to access anything about determining the leader?
Milliseconds. If that, I mean, it's just a basic math problem for the computer to say, okay, last block, I already have all 50 of them serialized, so I already know this one's 0, this one's 1, this one's 2, this one's 3. Run it through the modulo, I got 52, or 32. 32, this is the leader. That's what I'm getting the network place from.
So what's the stop leaving impersonation on before the election?
So the leaders themselves.
Milliseconds, that's a long time.
Not for a distributed network, it's not. Each of them has their own individual CA keys, which allows them to sign. When I say hash the block, really what they're doing is they're hashing and signing. The final block hash is a signature of it. It's just a different transform number.
Kind of the same thing. Hash and sign are almost the same thing.
Not quite. Because you can sign something, I can sign something, that hash is going to be completely different.
No. Not the hash is the same, but the operation is the same.
Cryptographically, not quite.
What's different?
So when you're signing it, you have to use your private key. You're not using private key to hash something. Hash is just a mathematical equation. The signature is the act of you encrypting something using your private key, so that when you decrypt it and the hash matches using your public key, you're good to go. I can hash something, she can hash something, and we can both get the exact same answer. If I sign something, she signs something completely different, it's impossible, mathematically impossible for me to sign something and get hers, with the exception of, there's a couple little exceptions, like for instance,
Collision.
yeah, if you offer a collision surface, like for instance, I want you to sign a piece of information, that piece of information is only ever going to be true or false. You can predict what it's going to be if you've got both examples. But if that piece of information is a long document that has a lot of different variables in play, then we've got more of a chance of seeing the heat method slide.
And it can have collision sometimes. But the signature is,